think we're live. I think we're going live and we're not doing a countdown, Big Daddy. I don't think there's going to be any time for the countdown. We're going to do it. We're going to say good morning, Winnipeg, or good evening, Winnipeg. Good evening, Manitoba. And for all of those joining us live on the Illegal Curve post-game show, good evening to everyone following the Jets and Leafs hockey game. As you can tell, it is I, Dave Manuk, running the hosting responsibilities. We got Ezzy Ginsberg over there. As you'll see, there's no Drew Mandel, which is why we didn't get to do our little 30-second countdown because I forgot how to do it. But that's okay. We're here. We're ready to go. We've got the post-game show. We've got lots of people. It seems like people are a little bit angry right now. Jets fall 5-3 to the Toronto Maple Leafs. They lose some ground in the battle for the North Division's top spot. The Leafs came out flying, Ezzy, and it seemed like they took all the wind out of the sails, even though the Jets were rested and the Leafs were a team that were frustrated, hadn't won a game in 5. What did you see to kind of open that game up for the Toronto Maple Leafs?
Yeah, well, first of all, I like the countdown. No countdown, sorry. We don't need a countdown. Let's get right into it, Dave. But yeah, I mean, obviously, the two quick goals early in the first period are killer. And, obviously, the goal that eventually gets credited to Jason Spezza is the backbreaker that takes Hellebuyck out of the game. But I mean, both of these teams were desperate going into this game. I mean, the Jets had a very stinky performance in their last game. You forget because it was so long ago, 5 days ago, right, Dave? But I mean, both teams were coming into this game off of a loss. Obviously, the Leafs 5 in a row as opposed to the Jets just the one in a row. But, I thought the Jets were just too loose at times. And I actually didn't mind the first period. I thought the Jets were probably the better team in the first period. And then obviously, the second period was probably the Leafs' best period. But, you look at, right up until the end of that game, the Jets are pushing, right? Like Pierre-Luc Dubois has the breakaway, not penalty shot. Nick Ehlers made a really nice pass on that play, and you had some really good sustained pressure in the Leaf zone. So it's not like this was a game in which the Jets kind of quieted down in the third period. But I mean, we knew that the Leafs were coming into this game with a lot to prove. I don't think they liked the way they played in the last game against the Jets at all, and we know that the Leafs have been very successful at Bell MTS Place. But this was just a game in which I thought, the Leafs were very opportunistic. They obviously buried their chances. But just at times I thought, the Jets were maybe, out there a little bit too long. I mean, you saw Josh Morrissey, Dave, out there on a couple of occasions, and I'm obviously not singling Morrissey out at all, but I think it was just one of those weird games, right? Like not a lot of power plays. All the goals come at even strength, Dave, right? And when you have 8 goals in a game, and obviously one of them was an empty netter, it's pretty rare that you don't have at least one on special teams, right? So overall, like it was a pretty entertaining game, considering that, these games aren't meaning much, but, heading into this game, the Jets still had an opportunity to catch them, and now you're 5 points back, and it's going to be really tough now.
Well, and Ezzy, the thing that I thought was interesting was that Paul Maurice, I thought, tried to take the importance of these games away from them earlier throughout the course. Remember, the Jets have had 2 days of practice, and a lot of his comments have been pretty consistent in terms of removing the importance, saying that these games aren't measuring stick games. They're not as important as games down, at the last game of the season. But at the same time, this is a Toronto team that you want to measure yourself up against, and you think that you're capable of beating in a series. And, this is a team that you need to jump on. Now, look, there's no question about it, Toronto got a jump from the energy perspective, getting Nick Foligno into the lineup for the first time. I think that there was a lot of excitement when you get adding a player. I'm not so sure, based on the comments in the section, in the comment section, I'm not so sure folks are feeling the Jets got that same sort of bounce from Jordy Benn. What was your impressions of his first game wearing a Jets uniform?
Well, and there was another chance for Jordy Benn. There were so many chances there in the third period. I mean, they weren't, what you would call grade A chances, Dave. But, Jordy Benn put a puck on the net, and it looked like Jack Campbell didn't see it at all. And Campbell was really solid in this game. So, I mean, I thought Jordy Benn was exactly what you would expect, right? And he hasn't played a game in a little while, but, I mean, he's obviously not going to play 20-plus minutes. So, I think his minutes were around 12 or 13 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. But I think, it's exactly what you would expect out of a veteran. 11:30 was Benn's ice time. So I mean that's what you're going to expect. You're not going to necessarily see him, getting into the high teens, right? Like maybe he gets close to 15, right, Dave, when he's out there. But I think this was just a simply getting him into a game, and we'll see what happens on Saturday night. Like I wouldn't be surprised if we see Ville Heinola, Dave. And we know that there's going to be a rotation, right? Like Stanley, Heinola, Ben. I think you don't want any of these guys sitting for too long, right? But it was really just a kind of a simple game, and Dylan DeMello, I think having the different D partner is something Paul Maurice and the coaching staff is also going to have to manage, right? Because there's always the chance that you see Dylan DeMello reunited with Josh Morrissey, and I wouldn't have a problem with that. But I think when you have a different D partner, and especially 4 days off between games, they weren't maybe the sharpest, but overall, like, and I realize we're getting some comments like Ty LeBrokery, my boy, and I really didn't think it was that bad of a game, like for the Jets. I really don't think it was. And we've seen this so many times over the years, right, Dave? Like a team scores a couple of goals early in a period, maybe not necessarily that early and that close together, right? But it really kind of throws a team off, right? Like it seems like you're just constantly clawing back in a game. And I thought, the Jets evened it up. Andrew Kopp was excellent tonight. We're almost 10 minutes into the post-game show here, and we haven't even talked about Adam Lowry. Like this was essentially a 3-line game for Paul Maurice, right? Like, you had, Nate Thompson and Trevor Lewis getting a little bit of ice time, but Adam Lowry coming out of the game is significant in a game in which, you're looking to tie the game up. So, I mean, that was unfortunate. And, I don't know if you want to get into it now, but that was absolutely a call that has to be made by the officials. Like I realize, hockey happens at a quick pace, Dave, but that's a hit to the head all day long.
Well, and I'm obviously I watched the game from the arena for the first 2 periods. I came home so I could do the post game because it's a little bit quieter here than all those yelling other media guys. So it was a little easier to do watch the third period at my house and do that. But that hit on Adam Lowry by Alex Galchenyuk in the first period, I was watching that and I thought to myself, he was in a vulnerable position. Now Adam Lowry was low, which is he was a little in a bit of an awkward spot. But I mean, that was a pretty bad hit, and you could see how pissed off he was. And our photographer, Colby Spence, took a pretty significant picture. I've got it on the website, illegalcurve.com right now, about, with why there was no call. And I agree with you. Like, to me, that's a play that needs, that's what you're trying to eliminate. And I get that hockey's a fast game, and I know that Lowry was in a bit of an awkward position. He's a big guy, and he was lower than he normally would have been. But you still got to be careful there. And I think, that's one of the things that the NHL is so crystal clear about trying to remove from this game is those headshots. And we saw it with Thornton on Matthew Perreault, where, later on, and that caused Perreault to leave the game for a little period of time. He came back. He was able to finish the contest. But those are the kind of hits that you don't want to see in a hockey game. I don't care what team you cheer for. You don't want to see guys getting hit to the head, because we know, forget about hockey, we know what kind of damage that does to them, in the short term and in the long term. Not worth it. So to me, I think that's the type of hit that'll get a look at. Maybe not the Thornton one so much, but I think the Galchenyuk one. What do you think, Ezzy? Yeah,
I absolutely think the Department of Player Safety will look at that one, and your guess is as good as mine, Dave, in terms of what will happen with that. Is it a fine? Is it a 1-game suspension? But I think watching that game, what makes that hit was definitely not clean right off the bat. And then you see, of course, the replay, and then that it really was a hit to the head. Lowry's not the type of player that you will complain to the refs a lot, right? Like, not saying that he's not a vocal player, but you could see he was really communicating with the officials. Like, he was really upset that wasn't called. And I think he knew that, that was a good shot. Like, you sometimes get a shoulder to the head or an elbow to the head, and it's not that much impact. But, Galchenyuk's not a small player. Like, Lowry's obviously a big man. There aren't many guys as tall as him, but Galchenyuk's solid, and he got a good piece of him. And we hope that obviously Lowry doesn't miss any time. It's speculation right now in terms of if he'll miss the game on Saturday. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes into the concussion protocol. I think that's what everybody's always going to be afraid of when a hit like that happens. But I thought Lowry was having a good game up until that point. We mentioned Andrew Kopp, Mason Appleton, and then you start have to juggling your lines and everything like that. But, overall, considering that, the start was slow, and I agree. And I realize a lot of people are talking about the start in the comments, and, that's to be expected, right? You have 4 days between games, and that's not an excuse, but it just happens, right? And it especially happens at this point in the season when you've played so much hockey in this condensed season, right? So overall, yeah, you're not happy, with the start, and you're not happy with the fact, Dave, that you couldn't get at least 1 point, right? But you could tell they were pushing for that extra point. Like the Jets were all in that third period to tie the game up and send it to the extra period. Just, they didn't have it tonight. And, Jack Campbell, I think, wanted to redeem himself from the last time he played the Jets, and he wasn't very good.
Well,
and he was pulled.
Yeah, and Blake Wheeler was just on doing the post-game media with our colleague, and Mike McIntyre of the Winnipeg Free Press said it was a high dangerous hit by Blake Wheeler. The exact quote was, I don't want to misquote our friend Mike McIntyre. He said, was late and high. You don't see Laus go down very often like that. Hopefully he's doing all right. And again, obviously the Jets captain is gonna defend his player and not like what he saw there, but you generally don't see these guys going after each other if they think it's a clean hit. Even if the media believes that something is a foul, you don't often see the players join if they don't believe in it.
I don't understand. Sorry, Dave. I was just going to say, I don't understand how anybody could argue that one. Like, to me, that is obvious, right? Like sometimes in hockey, it looks like it might have been accidental, or it depends. Like, especially when you're talking about hits closer to the boards, right? Like there's maybe some gray area. Right. Like there's no gray area here. Like, yeah, that's a hit to the head. That Galchenyuk should have been penalized, and he probably should be at least fined, if not given a 1-game suspension. And one other thing I wanted to throw in there, Dave, a lot of people talking about Pierre-Luc Dubois. I know you want to get into, some other players and Hellebuyck as well. And obviously we're not going to put this all on Hellebuyck, guys. Like, he lets in, maybe one of those goals is weak. Like if you're going to say that the Austin Matthews goal was weak, that's an incredible shot, short side, right, Dave? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's not
there was a lot that was wrong with that play, as I 100% agree with you.
Well,
it wasn't all on Connor Hellebuyck. It was,
you can't
breakdowns all over the ice.
Exactly. There were defensive breakdowns. I mean, you can't give Matthews that much space. I mean, 34 goals at this point in the season is absolutely bonkers. But I did want to mention Pierre-Luc Dubois, and he was criticized, and we were on him a little bit last game against the Oilers. He was incredible. I mean, I thought that was one of his best games of the year, really, certainly as a Jet, Dave. And he doesn't score, goes to the backhand, and Jack Campbell makes a nice save there on the breakaway. But I thought he was involved in the game, and him, Ehlers, and Stastny were really looking good tonight. We know that those three together have had a little bit of success earlier in the season, so wanted to get in there. I think that's very promising, considering that Dubois is going to be a guy that goes up against the other team's best players, and you also want him to be creating offensively. So I thought he was really strong tonight.
Yeah, and I think that was a key. I think that was one of the things I was thinking when the Jets were trying to push to equalize this game, was that there was nobody net fronts. There was nobody taking away Jack Campbell's eyes. And I thought to myself, how are you going to score on this guy? I mean, you're not creating anything in front. Everybody's on the perimeter. And Pierre-Luc Dubois was actually in front. He was trying to take away Jack Campbell's eyes. So I agree with you. I thought he was trying to create some more momentum, a lot more than what we've seen traditionally, what we've seen in the last little bit from him. So I thought he definitely was a player who was trying to generate. And to your point, just, getting back on that idea of hits, like the Josh Morrissey hit by Foligno along the boards. That
has to be called. Like, that absolutely has to be called. And then, of course, there's a penalty right after Dubois goes up and cross-checks Foligno because he's coming in to stand up for Morrissey, right? So I thought the reffing, I mean, Dave, we've been doing the show for a really long time. We don't like to, criticize the officiating too much tonight, but this was one of those nights where the officiating wasn't very good.
Yeah, I know. I think you're 100% right. I think there were instances where they could have made calls, but again, at the end of the day, we have to get back to the beginning of this game. I mean, the beginning of this game really was what set the tone for the entire thing. And again, it wasn't that the Jets were out of this by any stretch of the imagination. The Jets very easily could have gotten a point, won this game. It wasn't necessarily, this wasn't a blowout by any stretch. This wasn't a game that the Jets weren't in, despite the fact that they had a very poor start. And again, don't get me wrong, Connor Hellebuyck didn't have a strong game, but there were a lot of things that occurred throughout the course of those goals against the Jets, breakdowns, Neil Pionk swiping the puck right onto Mitch Marner's stick. That, I mean, you can say Matthews made the pass, but Pionk helped it along. Derek Forbert didn't have a strong game. Here's another guy who it seems like the season is catching up to him a little bit. Again, he, in my mind, is more of a third. He's been good with Neil Pionk, but I think a lot of guys have been good with Neil Pionk. He's been a very good defenseman for this Winnipeg Jets team. Derek Forbert's probably ideally, a third pairing defenseman, maybe able to jump up to the second pairing if need be, but more ideally suited, in my mind, as a third pairing defenseman.
Yes, I agree. And Dave, we talked about it earlier, right? Like, we think there's a really good chance that Jordy Benn comes out of the lineup, and it was in place of Logan Stanley, right? So we talked about it before, just going on basically a rotation of, each guy gets a game before the other guy gets back in, right? Then you would expect Ville Heinola to play Saturday. And, we talked about this on the Saturday show before, Dave. You wonder, are we going to see, Ville Heinola creep up into that top four? And I think, there could be a really interesting pair there with Ville Heinola and Neil Pionk. And I realize, some people don't necessarily like the, two smaller defensemen together. I think that's ridiculous. Like, I realize that when you have certain matchups, but at the end of the day, you just want to put the two defensemen that have the most success together, right? So I agree with you. I think, the natural idea, or I guess the logical idea, I should say, would be that, Ville Heinola just goes on the third pair, plays with Dylan DeMello, replacing Jordy Benn. But I think Paul Maurice has a lot of juggling to do there. And I realize that, there are a lot of people in the chat talking about there's too much juggling. But when you have a player like Blake Wheeler out of the lineup, and then Jansen Harkins comes in, and then obviously Harkins comes out, and then you have players that are natural centers that move to wing and then back, namely Stastny and Dubois, right? Like, he's forced to make these changes, right? Like, we knew that, the move coming, Dave, was Pierre-Luc Dubois going back to center. He's a natural center. We don't expect Dubois to go on the wing unless, there's a situation like Blake Wheeler going out of the lineup, then maybe you move Stastny to center, and then you move Dubois to the wing. So, depending on what happens with Adam Lowry, I don't expect much to change on the forward lines. Like, I think you're probably, the logical move would be to move Stastny down the middle, right? Like, I think that's what you would expect. Andrew Kopp could, of course, always play, third line center, but he's been very effective on the wing. But as far as defense goes, Dave, back to what you said, I agree. I didn't think Forbort had a particularly strong game. I didn't think, anyone on the defense really had a particularly strong game, but Ville Heinola is much more skilled than a third pairing defenseman, but obviously hasn't played a lot of games in the NHL. Yep. So it's going to be really interesting to see, 10 games left. If Heinola gets into 3 or 4 games, let's say, you'd have to think that, Maurice is thinking, who does he work with the best? And, it's been a small sample size, looked okay with DeMello, but we've seen Morrissey and Heinola too. But of course, that means that, Morrissey probably goes to the right side.
Yeah. And I think what it comes down to, Ezzy, is that I think Paul Maurice has to get away from the old ice hockey, a skinny guy with a hefty guy, and that sort of idea, because
I would be the hefty guy. You would be the skinny guy.
But I think what it comes down to is that you have to get away from this notion that, like, again, don't get me wrong, I understand that playoff hockey is a completely different animal and it's a heavier game, and so you can't necessarily say what goes in the regular season goes in the postseason. I understand that, but at the same time, let's see what you've got here, right? Let's see what you have when you put Dylan DeMello with Josh Morrissey. One of the comments in the comment section, I just saw it, was, what DeMello did in terms of stabilizing Josh Morrissey's game. Again, I like Tucker Poolman, but Tucker Poolman is a third pairing defenseman. He's not a first pairing guy. He's had good games, but I think he's better suited to be your third pairing guy. Poolman and Forbort would be an okay pairing as your third pair. And then you have a guy like Heinola potentially come in and be a second pairing guy with Pionk if you have to.
Forbort and Poolman, by the way, would be a UND connection.
That would be a double. Yeah, exactly. So there you go. But that's what I'm just curious to see if we'll see from this Jet staff, because that's what Paul Maurice has talked about, right? Like, and he may not get what he wants, because what does he want? He wanted his forward line starting tonight. Yep. He had said this maybe 10 days ago. He wanted his forward lines to be stabilized and rolling. This is what he wanted it to look like. And obviously injuries happen. We saw it tonight, literally, with Adam Lowry leaving in the first period and not coming back. But at the same time, that was his goal, was that the forward lines would be ideally together for the next stretch of games, but he was going to mix and match those defensemen. And to me, again, and I don't make these decisions ultimately, I wish I did, but if you move you get a chance to get a guy like Ville Heinola into the lineup, see what he can do. You don't really have to worry about your positioning, right? You know the Leafs most likely are going to finish first. You know you're most likely going to finish second or third. So why not see what you have in these final 10 games? You know what you have in Derek Forbort. You know what you have in Tucker Pullman. But it's Ville Heinola is the one guy, really. I mean, again, we all know that he is a future, star defenseman on this team, but maybe the future is now. And maybe if you give him the opportunity, a guy who hasn't played a lot because of the way the schedule's gone, I think now is the time to give him the opportunity.
Yes, I agree. And we've said this so many times over the years, right? Like when a player is 19 years old, 20 years old, everybody thinks they're going to, come into the NHL and do what Patrick Laine did in his rookie year. But I'm with you, Dave. Like, I know Ville Heinola is a really popular defenseman, amongst Jets fans and in our chat, but I'm with you. I think the future is now. Like, I think he is that talented. I mean, we've seen what he's done, at the world junior level. I mean, you've watched him much more than I have, Dave, with the Moose, but this is a guy, Pascal Vincent trusts him and thinks so highly of him that he puts him out in all situations, right? Like, this isn't a guy that's been sheltered. The Jets think very highly of Heinola, and I agree. With 10 games left, I said earlier, Heinola maybe gets into 3 or 4 games, but, maybe he gets into 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe even more games, right? Because that, he hasn't played a lot of games at the NHL level, and he had that, 3 or 4 weeks off, after he was called up from the Moose and wasn't playing any games. So I think you want to make sure that, Logan Stanley's getting into some games as well. But yeah, I don't think necessarily, that Jordy Benn has to play, a perfect third of the games, even though it's 10 games, but you know what I mean, Dave, 3 games or whatever it is, right? But yeah, I agree with you. I think you do want to see, Ville Heinola up in the top 4, getting some special teams, time. But, going back to tonight's game, I mean, the Leafs and Jets have definitely had some back and forth games, right? Like, the Jets have had some success. They've won some games in Toronto. Obviously, the Leafs are winning all the games here in Winnipeg, but I really think this is the team that you're going to have to beat. Like, I strongly believe the Jets can beat the Oilers. I realize that the Oilers have owned the Jets this year. What is it? 5 wins out of 7 games. And I realize that a lot of people are looking at this Jets team right now with 10 games left, and they're saying, well, the 2 teams that they've had the least success against are the Leafs and the Oilers. Well, yeah, those are the other 2 best teams in the division. And even though, the wins and losses aren't there, you go back and you look at these games, a lot of these games could have gone the other way, right? Like the games in Toronto, the Leafs could have easily won those games. Connor Hellebuyck stole those games. But I think, Dave, that this game was much different than the game against the Oilers. Like, that game was clearly a team that was happy to have that 4-day break coming up, and the effort wasn't there. Like, that wasn't the issue here. A bad start really, really killed them. And then, we talked about it. Blake Wheeler's first game back, like a beautiful pass to Kyle Connor. Jake Muzzin was, tied up with Scheifele, dropped his stick, and he was just completely out of position. Kyle Connor just skated to the open ice, and Wheeler fed him with some beauty sauce there. But, I really liked the Jets' overall forward lines. I like the mix. I realized that, they had to basically run 3 lines after Lowry. But aside from, the first, let's say, couple minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, I like the Jets game for the majority of this game, Dave.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, there were some things that you would like. Again, ideally, you don't see that start, but that's something that the coach has to account for. You can't just say, well, we didn't have a good start. Well, you're coming off a game against the Oilers that you're not happy with because you dropped that one. You got shut out in your home building to start a 5-game series. And now you've got 2 straight losses because you've got, this one against the Toronto Maple Leafs. You get the Leafs back on Saturday night. You can't, just throw this game away, though. And to your point, Ezzy, I mean, and it's the point the comments were made earlier. There's flaws in all teams. Like, none of these teams in the North Division are perfect. I mean, we've seen people can say that, well, the Jets are going to get torched by the Oilers, but the Oilers can't beat the Habs. The Jets beat, like, it's an interesting sort of situation where the way these teams are playing. And again, playoff hockey is a different animal. But to me,
also regular season records have little or nothing to, like, you can't translate that into the playoffs. Like again, right. I can't back that up. Unfortunately, I haven't poured over, decades of data, but I do know that, regular season matchups, you can't just say, well, the Jets have lost 5 games against the Oilers, so in a best of 7 series, the Oilers are going to win the series in 5. That's just not the case.
Yeah, no. I agree with you. I think that look, you can't write this stuff off. I mean, look, if you could make bold predictions based on anything, How many people made bold predictions the Jets weren't even going to be a playoff team, or we're going to be scratching and clawing to be, the fourth team in this North Division, and yet they're battling for first. So I think we have to temper that. I mean, again, Connor Hellebuyck had an off night. 3 goals. What was it? 3 goals on 6 shots.
Yeah,
that doesn't happen very much for a guy who was a Vezina winner. So I've already got an angry message from my dad making a comment about that. But I mean, the point is that I get that fans are upset about Connor Hellebuyck and the Jets overall, but again, it was one game.
And it's recency bias, Dave. It's complete recency bias here. And we know, this I do know, when Connor Hellebuyck has a bad game, he almost always responds with an excellent game, right? So would any of us be surprised? I mean, first off, he's for sure getting the start on Saturday. There's absolutely no way that Brossoit gets the start. So Hellebuck's going to get the start. Would any of us be surprised if he gets a shutout or lets in 1 goal? I might have jinxed it there. I apologize, Hellebuyck. But no, I mean, come on. I mean, he had a bad night. That's it. Move on.
Well, and I think it's one of those situations where, what have we always talked about? Now, we talked about this recently, but that 4-day break, fine, you can lament and say, well, they've had some time off. They've had a chance to relax. They weren't ready, which, again, this is the National Hockey League. You're paid to be ready. So there's no excuse. I'm not making excuses because it's not for me to defend them. They have to defend themselves by their play, obviously. So I think that's one of the things that you need to see from the Jets. And it's about not allowing these slides to happen. And so far to date this season, this isn't a trend we've seen. I do believe, they don't have a 3-game losing streak this season, right? So that's one of those things from the Winnipeg Jets that we've seen, and they've been able to bounce back. And to your point, Connor Hellebuyck specifically bounces back after he has these big kind of gaff games. So I think,
and that's going back years. That isn't just the last couple of years. This is going back to the 2017-18 season, right? Mm-hmm. So I get it. I mean, I really do get it. People are fired up, and it's like we said right off the top of the show, Dave. It's because the Jets had a lousy performance 5 nights ago against Edmonton. Right. So this is 2 in a row. This is at this point in the season. Look at how apoplectic people in Toronto were. The Leafs had lost 5 games in a row, and I think you do have to put that in context, right? You think the Leafs wanted to lose 6 games in a row and only be 1 point up on the Jets with the Jets a game in hand. This game was a lot more, let's say, edgy and hotly contested maybe than you would have thought it was going to be a week ago, because the Leafs lost those 2 games to Vancouver. You think the Leafs were probably looking at those 2 games and saying, okay, the Canucks have been off for a month. The game the other night, it was 6-3, 6-2. That was embarrassing, right? Mm-hmm. And so Jack Campbell and David Riddick haven't been playing that well. And, Jack Campbell had something to prove here, and he played well. He wasn't perfect, but, he made 30 plus saves. I don't know exactly what it was. So you do have to give the Leafs credit, but yeah, I'm not going to say these last 2 games have really, changed anything. The reality is, at the end of the day, the regular season doesn't mean a lot. And as soon as the playoffs start, don't get me wrong. I mean, the Jets defensive coverage, and I know people are, making a few comments here. I have problems with it. Don't get me wrong, guys. I have concerns not just about, the Jets defensemen, but, the Jets as a team, the forward group as well. At times, there are lapses in judgment, and players are left wide open. There's turnovers. But we know that, there are other teams that have these issues as well. You don't think the Oilers have these issues, right? So, I mean, I think that you absolutely, need to clean this up. You don't want to go on like you said, Dave, you don't want to lose the next game and then, go on a 3, 4, 5 game losing streak. These next 3 games are critical. Even though you're not fighting for your playoff lives, you don't want to lose these games. You don't, with 10 games left in the season, like we said, you don't want to be 3-7. You'd much rather be 7-3, or preferably 10-0.
Right. Well, of course, but you know what, Ezzy, that's a good point. And let's just pause and say you're listening to the Illegal Curve post-game show hosted by Dave Minuk, my boy Ezra Ginsburg.
Drew Mandel is the best celebrating host we've ever had, by the way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Drew Mandel is celebrating his 9th wedding anniversary. I believe his 9th. So we'll wish him and Laura all the best as they celebrate their evening. But you know what? And as one thing I want to mention, people smash that like button. We can't have a show that I'm hosting have this few likes. I know you're pissed off about the Jets not doing well.
Smash
it. We want to get those likes up. So get the like, make sure you're subscribing, and make sure you're hitting those likes. We understand you're not happy with the way that the game went, but that's not mine and Ezzy's fault. So let's get those likes way up.
By the way, I like what Paul Odette is saying, build the new arena at the old Polo Park location. And while we're at it, let's bring Chi-Chi's and Fingers back.
Well, I mean, if we're gonna, absolutely. Now,
Eastside Mario's, Madison Dell, let's do it.
I'm happy to do everything, but and the one thing we should mention, since we were casting our heads towards Portage, up Portage towards Polo Park, if we keep going up Portage all the way to the Iceplex, we're going to take a little quick sidebar from the Jets talk. Tonight was the first time in the history of the Winnipeg Jets and the Manitoba Moose being in the same city that you had both teams playing in Winnipeg at the exact same time. Well, both teams playing in Winnipeg at the same in the same day was the first time ever. And the Moose, unlike the Jets, were rolling tonight. They won 3 straight coming into tonight's game. They were playing Calgary's Farm Club Stockton Heat, and they started off strong and they ended up finishing strong, and they ended up winning. I think the final score, I had to start doing this show, so I think the final score was 5-2 for the Moose, but you had a beautiful goal from Cole Perfetti. David Gustafson scored a nice goal. Jeff Malott is a new name that fans are learning about. He scored as well. Christian Reichel got on the board. So you had the Moose rolling along, and that's probably a good thing. We saw some guys play their first games. Nelson Noje played his first game in 13 months because he's been on the taxi squad.
Wow.
And
13 months.
13 months. He played. The last game he played was with the Moose, that final game in Iowa, I believe it was, or here against Iowa in March of last year. And then Dominic Toninato played his first game. It was his first regular season game in like a year, and he had played 3 games in the bubble with the Panthers. But
give
he
those
also
guys some props, right? Like that can't be easy, right? Like, yeah, these guys are professional hockey players, and they'll do what's asked of them. But come on, like that's unprecedented, right? Like at the end of the day, these guys want to play games.
Yeah.
So good for those guys for being good team players and finally getting into some games here.
Well, and you know what, and the other thing also is that you had guys like Dylan Sandberg playing back in the lineup. He and David Gustafson were both dealing with injury. They both got back in. So there's a lot to be liking that's what's going on in the farm. I know people are very focused on what's going on with the Jets, but the Moose are Johnny Kovacevic. I knew I was forgetting one of the Moose goal scorers, Johnny Kovacevic, 2017 third rounder defenseman. He loaded up. I said he loaded up the cannon. He didn't really load it up, but he took a quick wrister and had a nice screen. So he got the first goal, his first goal of the season, the first goal for the Moose. So this is a bit of sidebar. I know we usually do just Jets post game, but it's a unique night. We're going to be seeing 3 more of these actually, or 2 more after tonight. Saturday, it'll be kind of what I've been pushing for years, was that idea of a Moose afternoon game followed by a Jets evening game. So that's what we're seeing on Saturday when the Heat and Moose start off in the afternoon. The Jets Leafs go Saturday night. And then on Monday, when the Oilers are in town, the Moose and the Heat will do battle again Monday afternoon, 1:00 start. It's gonna be a hell of a day. I'm going right there, and then I'm going to the arena. So it'll be a big game, a big day of Moose coverage, but it'll be a lot of fun. And the prospects are rolling. And Cole Perfetti, again, we unfortunate news. We haven't really talked about this on the show, but we had it on the website illegalcurve.com. The OHL season was canceled. Unfortunately, that's got to be a terrible loss for all those kids. But one of the silver linings, Ezzy, is that the 2020 first rounder for the Winnipeg Jets is going to be playing meaningful pro hockey, continuing his development under Pascal Vincent.
Yeah, and on that note, let's hope that the Women's World Championship also happens, in the not too distant future. There's talk, Dave, maybe that it takes place in Texas. Sean Shapiro of The Athletic reported on that, and I realized that certain things are out of everyone's control here, but the women have to have their World Championship leading up to the 2022 Winter Olympics. I just thought I'd get that in there as well, and it's also it's been horrible for even any level, minor hockey. I mean, I work at Hockey Manitoba, so I know, how it's affected, various levels of hockey. But I mean, it's terrible for the OHL players, right? Especially the ones, that aren't going to get a chance to play again. Right. But going back to what you said before, Dave, about the Moose, earlier on in the homestand, I know the Moose were struggling a little bit here. And so it's nice to see them go on this winning streak. And, just Cole Perfetti. I mean, we know that he's not going to play, for the Jets this year. I mean, maybe he does get into some games later, into the season or in the playoffs if there are injuries. But obviously, right now, he's playing his games with the Moose. But just watching, the highlights, like I'm always looking at your Twitter feed. I obviously haven't been able to, get out to the Iceplex though, to watch a game in person. But his skill is just so evident, right? And you mentioned Dylan Sandberg, Johnny Kovacevic, like. That's the great thing that we talk about year after year with the Moose. Like you're going to see these guys do this at the NHL level eventually, right? Like Pascal always talks about it. Like the goal of the Moose isn't to keep these guys with the AHL. Like the goal is to prepare them for the NHL. So, just great to see the Moose rolling. Unfortunately, the Jets weren't even able to get the win, but I think you have to take a step back, Dave, sometimes and remember, how unique this is, right? Like we're never going to see the Jets and the Moose play in the same day, of course, right? So, you just have to kind of appreciate it for what it is. It's unfortunate right now, that we can't have fans in the building, but hopefully on Saturday we'll have a couple wins for the Jets and the Moose to talk about.
Yeah, and just to answer Paul Adet's question, you can watch highlights of the Moose game. Usually I post them on the website, on our website. You can usually watch it. They have a YouTube channel, the Manitoba Moose web YouTube channel. So if you go there, they'll usually post highlights of the game so you can watch it on there. People are asking, if Adam Lowry's out for any length of time. We don't know, obviously. I didn't see Paul Maurice's his game comments yet, so I'm not entirely certain if there's any update on Adam Lowry. But, again, the likelihood, Ezzy, what do you think, is probably Jansen Harkins comes in and a guy like David Gustafson, maybe, because although David Gustafson's just coming back from injury, so it might be a little bit easy just to call someone else up who's, like a Juno Lowoto, that sort of idea. But what do you think if Lowry's down for a little bit, what do you see from the Winnipeg Jets plan moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Dave, like I'm just checking, our friend Mike McIntyre's Twitter feed here. Maurice finished speaking, I guess, about 10 minutes ago. His exact tweet was, "That was as short and curt as I've heard Jets coach Paul Maurice in quite some time." So obviously it wasn't a very long post-game presser. Jason Bell, of course, good friend of the show, asked Paul Maurice if there should have been maybe a response after Alex Galchenyuk's hit on Lowry. Maurice was quoted as saying, "If you circle a guy's name on the board, you get sued." So, take that however you want it. But, obviously, the Jets were not happy with that Galchenyuk hit on Lowry. And, Dave, that, the Jets are going to send that into the league if the league hasn't already kind of, queued it up to look at. But yeah, going back to what you asked before, Dave, Jansen Harkins is that next man up, right? It almost seems like it doesn't matter, who gets injured. Harkins is going to be, the next guy in. And then obviously, if it's long-term, then like you said, there might have to be some moves between, the Moose and the taxi squad, etc. But, we hope it's not long-term. So, if Harkins gets into the lineup, that's nice. But, going back to what you said before, at this point in the season with 10 games left, I think you want to have a little bit more continuity in your forward lines. And like you said, I think, with whatever it was when Paul Maurice, I think it was with 12 games left or 13 games left, was when he said that he wanted to really know what his forward lines were going to be. Well, it's hard when you have injuries, and the Jets have been lucky for the most part this year. They haven't had a lot of injuries, and certainly they haven't had any long-term injuries, right? So, I mean, Brian Little, obviously, not included in that, in that comment, but for the most part, the Jets have been able to stay healthy. So we'll see what happens here if Adam Lowry is able to go on Saturday or not. But yeah, I would expect, the logical move would be Perreault gets bumped up, right? And Stastny goes back to the middle, something like that. And then, Harkins will probably play on the fourth line with Lewis and Thompson.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of questions right now coming from the chat as to whether the Jets needed to respond to the Galchenyuk hit on Lowry and whether you need to have some sort of response. The problem I have is that who does that on this Jets team? Right? Who really is going to it's ironic.
Well, and what would that, is someone going to fight Galchenyuk? Like,
well, no, I think that's the thought is that, would
Galchenyuk doesn't fight a lot. Like, I think he's fought a few times before. Like, I would have to check, hockey fights, our friends at hockeyfights.com and see if, they, see how many fights he's had. I'd be surprised if it's over, half a dozen, Dave, in his NHL career. But again, what's that like? I don't think that's what would that have done? Like, I think a lot of people that are in the chat, talking about the Jets can't grind it out. They don't play a heavy game. This isn't the 2018 Jets. The buff is gone, guys. Like Ben Sherratt is gone. Like the Jets have some physical players. Logan Stanley wasn't in the lineup, but hockey's not like it used to be. Like, don't get me wrong. I have all the Rock'em Sock'em tapes. I love fighting in hockey, but you see the odd fight, but maybe I'm wrong here, but I just don't necessarily think, you want to win the game. You want to score the tying goal and score the eventual winning goal, right, Dave? In this type of game, like, I don't think anything needed to be done. Like, to me, physicality, wasn't the reason why the Jets lost this game. Some bad defensive play in the first period, a couple of goals in 70 seconds or whatever it was, 80 seconds. And the Jets were playing catch up all night, even though they did tie the game up. So that's kind of my thoughts on what happened with Galchenyuk and Lowry.
Yeah, and look, I think there's an argument to be made for both. Like, I can understand what you're saying. I just think, like, sometimes you have to kind of send a message. It looked to me like Toronto was trying to be a more physical team. I mean, you had Simmons trying to decapitate Pierre-Luc Dubois when he was in front, trying to hack at a puck that Jack Campbell had covered. It ended up resulting in a power play for the Winnipeg Jets. But I think that there's a lot of that element that, again, you're 100% right. This isn't the Jets team of old. And the truth is, they just don't have that type of player, and Logan Stanley, someone had said that in the comments, and I agree. He's a guy who's shown that he's willing to stand up for his teammates if he sees something that, he doesn't like. And I just think, like, sometimes it's not necessarily about whether it's going to have some sort of direct impact on the game itself, but it almost like circles the wagons for the team, right?
Yes.
It gets everybody kind of connected. And I think that's what people are looking for. I think that's what people in the chat, I think maybe that's why they're upset. They're talking about this Jets team. I think that's what you're not seeing. You're not seeing enough of that, even if it doesn't result in a fight, right? Even if you see guys go to that area and kind of, say, like, this is our teammate. You're not going to do that. You're in our house. That's not what you're doing. I think that's kind of the mentality. People are wondering why the Jets don't seem to employ that a little bit more than they seem to be.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. And I see, our boy, Marsh, one day PGA 69 chiming in, Larry the sports guy, and people are perfectly in their right to disagree with me. Guys, disagree with me. If you've listened to the show over the last 12 years, you know that I have a lot of horrible takes. I like physical hockey. I like fighting. Like, Dave, you will back me up on this, right?
It's true.
Like, yeah, I love the fighting, but, like, I just don't, in this game, to me, like, yeah, okay, sure. Like, I saw Marsh say, maybe Nate Thompson, chucks down and throws the knuckles. Sure. I guess I didn't think that was in this game. I don't know why. I mean, certain games, I guess, Galchenyuk, that's a dirty hit. Was it intentional? I don't even think it matters. I mean, it was a hit to the head. I guess just because it was Galchenyuk as opposed to Matthew Tkachuk or a player like that, you know what I mean, Dave? Like, it just seemed like, that response wasn't at least watching that game, I didn't necessarily, I wasn't waiting for that to happen. So yeah, could the Jets have maybe, thrown their weight around, flexed their muscle a little bit more? Sure. And I think, if stuff like that happens, and also the game wasn't a chippy game. Like you mentioned, Wayne Simmons was throwing his weight around, and they have other guys, that can throw their weight around. But it just didn't seem appropriate to me. And again, I know a lot of people are disagreeing with me in the chat, and I probably am wrong. But, I think if the game takes on more of a chippy tone on Saturday, then maybe you see some fisticuffs. And, even if Logan Stanley's in the lineup, it could be Heinola. Then you have another guy that could maybe, chuck the knuckles. But, at the end of the day, they didn't play well enough to win this game. And so, whether there was a fight or not, or a quote unquote response to the Galchenyuk hit on Lowry, it didn't even really matter, did it?
No. And I think ultimately you started to see a little bit of pushback from the Jets, right? You're down, you get that Kyle Connor goal with 2 minutes and 4 seconds to go in the second period.
It was a beautiful goal.
Beautiful goal, milestone for Mark Scheifele. I mean, Billy Wheeler made the pass, but milestone for Mark Scheifele. He hits 300 NHL assists. I think he's just around 200 goals. I think he's at 198, because I think he's 2 points off of 500 for his career. So that's a pretty impressive milestone for the Jets' first ever select draft pick back in 2011, a draft you were very familiar with in Minnesota, when you and was it Brett Burns were sharing suit tips, I believe, if I recall correctly.
Right. Well, also just I was going to say the NHL jersey, right? We didn't have
Oh,
the
that's
Jets
right.
jersey
That's
at
right.
that point, so you'll never forget. When Mark Chipman, Chevy, they announced that the name is the Jets, because at that point, of course, we didn't know, right? So yeah, you'll never forget. And Mark Scheifele was also a bit of a reach, right? He was taken a little bit higher than we originally thought. But you're right, Dave. I mean, Scheifele had a strong game as well. And 198, you're right, Dave. So Scheifele will probably have that 200th goal. He might have it as early as Saturday. It's not going to be that long, but he was strong, and we'll see what happens with the lines here. But my money would be most likely Kopp moving up, and then Stastny moves to the middle. But Lowry might be good to go on Saturday, so we'll see.
Well, and it'll be interesting as to see what they do now, because now you have an opportunity to play Paul Stastny as your third line center, which is something we've advocated for how long on the show, which is you brought Paul Stastny in to be a center. Does it make sense to have him on the wing? And he's been fine on the wing, but he's a center, and he's played center his whole career. And he's one of the smartest hockey players you're probably ever going to meet. So he's able to adapt. But again, it's more about ideal. And by the way, as a quick aside, Schmark Meifley, I think, asked me if this is that David's room. Sorry, over there. Sorry. It's from my childhood. And yes, it is. It is a childhood memento, if you will. And so I'm trying to create some nice swag here, as he's got an impressive backdrop. And although the fire everybody seems to like, so that's good. But no, sorry, I threw myself off there. But I think actually what I think will be very interesting, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this. I think what'll be very interesting is if Paul Maurice will use this as an opportunity. And again, we don't know what's going to happen to Adam Lowry. Obviously, he didn't go into it very much, which means you need to stay.
It didn't look good. I'll say that much.
No, it didn't look good.
I won't be surprised either way, right? Like if he plays on Saturday, I won't be surprised. He's a tough kid, obviously.
Right.
And I'm 38 years old, so I can say that. But if he doesn't play, I mean, it was a pretty good shot that he took. So we'll see what happens.
And I think but I think what it does is it gives you an opportunity and by you, I mean head coach Paul Maurice, to really get this team kind of tinker maybe. I mean, here's a chance. Look, these games don't matter. Again, we've said this for how long? Like you're a playoff team. And I'm not saying it's an exhibition game, and I'm not saying you don't have pride and you want to win. Of course you do. Every game, nobody goes out there. Again, it's kind of like the idea of when it's one of those cringy questions that sometimes our colleagues will ask like players about draft picks. I always think to myself, these guys don't care about draft picks. That's not what they don't care. This team, they're about winning right now. That's what this is.
The GMs care about draft picks, and the scouts care about draft picks. Players do not care about draft picks. What we mean by that is that they obviously, we're not saying that Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler don't care about Cole Perfetti. That's not what we're saying.
Of course not. But he's a player.
We're saying that these guys are focused on winning games, not what 2 years from now is going to look like.
Right. And so I think one of the things that you can do here is you have an opportunity to really see what you can manufacture, maybe change some things up. Again, Matthew Perreault seemed to be a guy who really made that third line better when he went in there.
Yep.
And again, maybe you're going to see, and again, we don't know, this is all speculative because we don't know the status of Adam Lowry. And again, stay tuned to a little site called illegalcurve.com. The Jets are scheduled to practice on Friday, at I believe 12 noon. So again, the schedule can always change between now and tomorrow morning. And we'll
that gives you just enough time to smash that subscribe button and also hit like and keep it locked to illegalcurve.com. And we're going to have all of the line combinations from Friday's practice. That's right. Exactly. And you can check out the practice report. That'll have the update. And if there is one on Adam Lowry, we'll have that on the website as well. But I think that's one of those things that you have to if you're Paul Maurice, here's your opportunity. I mean, I know you said, ideally you're going to be able to have your lines and roll with it. But the truth is, if you think about it, nobody in the NHL is going to say you're going to have the same four lines for the remaining 10 or 11 or 12 games. That's just not realistic. Guys get hurt. You lose a guy for a period, you lose a guy for a game, you lose a guy for 3 or 4 games. That kind of stuff happens. So at the same time, here's their opportunity. Get Harkins in, move Harkins back. Harkins looked good the last couple games. I thought Harkins was excellent. And again, Harkins was a guy who was able to jump in. If you remember when he jumped into the Jets lineup, and he was feeling good last year with the Moose, obviously he had an excellent campaign with Manitoba. When he went up to the Jets, I mean, there were instances where he jumped up onto that all-star campaign.
That's right. And when he jumped up onto that he was on the second line playing with Blake Wheeler. And I actually thought he looked okay because he's such a cerebral guy. So I think he's one of those, like, he's got hands, he's got the awareness. maybe give him an updated role. Now, the reality is it seems unlikely. This is just my own, thought process. I'm not the coach. I don't make these decisions, given the fact that he has been sitting, obviously, when he could be playing. So it's hard to see him getting that kind of jump other than to play on the fourth line. But I'm just saying, here's an opportunity to really get these guys kind of give your team a jump. I mean, if you see something that works, maybe it gets Pierre-Luc Dubois going. Maybe it gets Nikolai Ehlers going. Maybe it gets Cal Connor going. Who knows what it does, but it breaks up. I mean, how many times do we have to see Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, Blake Wheeler? We know what you've got with those three guys. And I'm just thinking
that's
now
not
is an opportunity.
That's absolutely not. We know that. I mean, that line has had success, but we've gone over this. That's not the line that you want to see, right? So and I see a couple people talking about the comments that we were making earlier about these games not meaning anything, like our boy Dom Zappia, and I think, Dom, what we're talking about, of course these games have meaning because they're playing the teams that they're going to play in the playoffs. We're talking about the Leafs and Oilers, obviously, but and obviously you can still catch the Leafs for first place, but what we're talking about is, and this is something that goes back previous years. We're not talking like just this year because it's an all Canadian division. In previous years, if you look at once a team has solidified a playoff spot, the Jets, for all intents and purposes, have clinched a playoff spot. What we're saying is that the playoffs are a whole different animal. So yeah, of course, with 10 games left, you want to go 8-2. You'd rather go 8-2, 7-3, as opposed to 2-8 or 3-7. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying that, at this point in the season, it's a grind, and you're not, you're not putting everything maybe that you would into a game. Maybe that's not the best way to put it, Dave. The games are different when you're competing for seeding as opposed to just trying to get into the playoffs. I mean, it's obvious, right? So yeah, you're going to have players resting. I wouldn't be surprised if Blake Wheeler rests, a little bit later in the season, or, maybe a guy like Mark Scheifele, the guys that have played the majority of the season, right? Some of the veterans like Josh Morrissey. Give Josh Morrissey a couple games off at the end of the season, honestly, right? Guys played big minutes all year long. So I agree with you. Let's see Jansen, Harkins in some different situations. With Blake Wheeler out, we saw Mason Appleton on the top power play unit. So I realize Paul Maurice gets a lot of criticism, but again, just to play devil's advocate here, Dave, if Pierre-Luc Dubois scores on the breakaway, and the Jets end up maybe winning this game in overtime, I think the conversation we're having after this game is a lot different. And now you would say, as that's a terrible take because the Jets lost the game 5-3. But all I'm saying is the Jets certainly had chances, to tie that game up in the third period. Yeah, it wasn't for lack of an effort. The game against the Oilers, Dave, was lack of effort. Saturday night against the Oilers, the effort wasn't there. That was a stinker. That was not the case tonight.
Yeah, and I think that one of those things that people need to remember is it's not as if the Leafs came in as giant beaters, and you made this point, and I think it's an excellent one. And I think it's one that needs to be reinforced, is that you had a Leafs team that hadn't won in 5 games. They're pissed off. They needed to win. Like and again, don't get me wrong, the Jets should be, to your point that you just made on the show, the Jets should be a pissed off team based on their game on Saturday against the Oilers. You absolutely should have been fired up and ready to go. So I'm not making excuses for the Winnipeg Jets. I thought the Winnipeg Jets weren't ready to start this hockey game and needed to be, and they were laissez-faire. They were not crisp. They didn't play as a team. You want to talk? They always talk 5-man unit. They didn't play like they played. They deserved assists on the Leafs goals, for God's sakes. The way this game started. But let's not lose sight of the fact that this is a Toronto Maple Leafs team that had come in, I think, 0-3-2 in the last 5 games. So, and if you think the Heat, in my fireplace and in Winnipeg is hot after one game, or just imagine a Toronto, dressing room and the city and the media after not winning for 5. I'm not making excuses, because I think the Jets needed to be ready to go, knowing what their opponent was going to be bringing tonight. I just think you have to be put into context that you had an opponent that was absolutely desperate to turn things around. And again, if Connor Hellebuyck is on his game, and if the Jets come out and start that game crispy, we're probably having a different conversation. And on Saturday night, you absolutely have to have a better start. Doesn't mean you have to score 2 goals in the first 2 minutes. It just means, as you said, Dave, you have to be sharper. There's just no excuse when you were following that up following that up after, I should say, the 3-0, the embarrassing 3-0 loss. I'll say that
on Saturday night. So that's what I'm concerned about here. I don't want this to. I don't think anybody. I mean, unless you're a Leafs fan, you don't want this to turn into a 3-game losing streak here. But no, these 10 games are going to be very important in terms of seeing how the Jets are able to, get some certain lines going. We'll see, if Paul Stastny is moved up to the middle, if Adam Lowry's not able to go Saturday, and maybe even if Adam Lowry is able to go, we'll see if Stastny's moved to the middle, and then we'll see, how Ville Heinola is used. But yes, the Jets are going to the playoffs. They're most likely going to finish second or third. Maybe they have an incredible run and catch Toronto, but tonight's game didn't help. I mean, you're 5 points back, Dave. That's going to be really hard to make up. But they obviously, could have made it a lot easier by picking up at least a point. But that's all I would take out. I think, at the end of the day, you are going to flush some of these losses. But Saturday is going to be important, as we talked about, because you're going into that game and you don't want to have your first 3-game losing streak of the year.
Well, and I think what it ultimately comes down to for me is that, and some of the comments that are coming up now, I agree with that idea is how many times have we seen this team bounce back? But now is you don't have an excuse. Again, can you lose Saturday's game and it's not like you're not making the playoffs if you lose. But the reality is you can't afford to allow Toronto to, quote, get in your head and have that sort of thought process that, hey, you can't beat us. It's the same with the Oilers. I think the games against the Oilers, and we said this on last Saturday's.
I think they're more important.
I agree with you.
You have to get some wins against the Oilers because it's five losses is not going to cut it.
No, and I absolutely, I think we said this on Saturday. Drew likes to call it our flagship show, but I think that's what we had said, is that you don't look past the Leafs games because obviously they're critically important. You have an opportunity to catch the team that's in first place, but those games against Edmonton are going to be so critical. And I think it's just because, again, like I said, and you made this point, and I agree with you. I don't care what you did on April 22nd to impact, that's not impacting what happens in the playoffs when your team could look different and the Leafs could look different. And there's a lot of hockey still left to play, right? There's still a lot of hockey left in this season. So we're not going to be able to say that whatever happened on April 22nd is even going to impact, like, again, you could see a totally different Jets team because you might have, we don't know what the status of Adam Lowry. We don't know Matthew Perreault finished the game, but he did take a hit, right? So, we don't know what's going to happen, what this team's going to look like in 2 days, let alone what they might look like in middle of May. And then once the playoffs start, I'm just thinking that, again, these games aren't hugely impactful in terms of being able to say this is what it's going to mean. But I still think you still have to be able to set a certain standard against the upper echelon teams. And again, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to suggest that the Jets are better than Toronto or better than Edmonton, but they're not that much different. That's what
exactly.
I think. The point.
And they're not that far behind Toronto, right? Like Nick Foligno is a good pickup. Don't get me wrong. I agree with you, Dave. I don't think that you can extrapolate too much out of 1 or 2 games. Yes, there's been a pattern against the Leafs. Like, don't get me wrong, Dave. I get really worried when it's trading chances against the Leafs. That's what they want, right? Like they're more skilled than the Jets overall. They don't have the better goaltending, even though Campbell and Campbell's been really good this year. And David Riddick, I think, was a very smart pickup by Kyle Dubas. Top to bottom, the Leafs are a deeper team. Not by much. I think the Jets forward group is just as skilled, if not more skilled. But just compare the defense. There's no doubt in my mind the Leafs top 6 is better than the Jets top 6. All due respect to the Jets. So it's going to be a close series, whether it's Jets versus Habs, Jets versus Leafs, Jets versus Oilers. Oftentimes it comes down to goaltending, but I think we need to take a step back and take a couple of deep breaths. And then, just have a day of practice and see where this game goes on Saturday night, because, it probably, is more important than we thought it was going to be a couple of weeks ago, with this little kind of 2-game losing streak here that the Jets have had.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Ezzy. I think we'll probably get ready to end the show. We've done an hour without Drew Mandel, so it's been a real good hour, actually.
Yeah,
and
one of the best hours of my life, I would probably say.
Yeah. I think Sean and Ken are going to be ready to start the Kenny and Rennie post-game show. But before, of course, you go, we want you to smash that like button. We want you to make sure you're subscribing to our channel. We'll be back on Saturday morning with the, quote, flagship show, the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. That starts at 9 o'clock on Saturday. And Ezzy, we've got Ted Wyman joining us. Who else is joining us on that show?
We've got David Alter, who writes for the Hockey News. He used to be with the Athletic, and back in the day, he was with the Score, and also former NHL goalie Mike McKenna is going to join us. He's now a Vegas Golden Knights analyst. The Golden Knights have won 8 games in a row, so we're going to talk to Mike about one of the Stanley Cup favorites right now.
And here's the other thing. You got to remember, we've got the we got another post-game show coming up on Saturday. So plenty of content. We've got the Illegal Curve website.com that you'll have plenty of Winnipeg Jets, Manitoba Moose news and analysis coming up throughout the course of the next few days. We'll have the post-game recap coming up as well. So make sure you smash that like, smash that subscribe button. Be sure to let us know what you think of the show in the comments section. We're going to play some commercials if I can actually make that happen. We'll see. I'm not making any guarantees, but if I can, then we're going to play some commercials. Thank our subscribers. I thank our sponsors, Zappia, Boston Pizza, Bernstein's Deli, Les Rikus, and Ezzy.
Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club, baby.
Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club. So thanks for them for making this show possible. Thank all of you for joining us in the chat. All of your comments, we really appreciate them. Have a great night, and we'll see you guys on Saturday. And I'm just going to end the show because I have no idea what I'm doing.